On today's episode of NUFC Transfer Daily, I'm going to be asking whether this transfer window could be saved. Malick Thiaw is through the door, talks are underway over Jacob Ramsey, Johan Wisser is still a target, and Alexander Isak is not yet gone. We'll talk more about the Swedish striker at the end of the video, but let's get into it in the meantime. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we get going, please do subscribe, like, hit the thumbs up and all that. Join the community ahead of the new season. Lots of big plans to announce over the coming weeks, so please do get involved. Today, I'm going to try and be a little bit more positive because there's lots of good news to talk about. Malik Thiaw was announced by Newcastle last night about 10 o'clock. We've discussed why that's such a positive, why Newcastle wanted him, what he'll bring. I've also written a piece on Forbes about him as well, which is again in the description as it was yesterday. And also talks are underway with Aston Villa over Jacob Ramsey. That new midfielder could well be coming in. And also with the striker situation, obviously, as I say, we will talk about Alexander Isak at the end because I do have some more thoughts on what's emerged over the last 24, 48 hours, but actually it's more positive than maybe it was yesterday. But yeah, I'm just going to try and look at in a positive spin at what could happen now this summer and where really there needs to be a lot of perspective, because I think, myself included, everybody's been quite negative about Newcastle this summer because of the rejections, because of the Isak stuff. But when you look a little bit closer and you put it into the context against other potential rivals, I think there's a lot to be excited about this season, and I'll explain why. First of all, we'll talk about Malik Thiaw now that he's through the door. And what was really interesting about what emerged yesterday was just how much Newcastle tried for him. Andy Howe doing the negotiations, talking, flying over to Italy at different times over the summer, speaking to Sandro Tonali and really pushing the move. That's the really interesting thing. A lot of the narrative this summer has been about players who don't want to play for Newcastle, whether it's Alexander Isak wanting to go or João Pedro, Hugo Ekitike and others choosing other clubs, and how Newcastle have become this sort of really undesirable place, which is not true. And as I say, I'm really wanting to rail against the negativity that, again, I admit that I've perpetuated maybe at times this summer, but if you look at Sky Sports News, if you look at, it's almost become a factual thing to say Newcastle summer has been a disaster, and it has in parts, but there are reasons why it's a positive summer, and I will get into those in a second. But the big thing about Thiaw that stood out to me from what he was saying yesterday was that he really wanted to join Newcastle, and there's lots of speculation that he chose Newcastle over interest from Bayern Munich, from Manchester United, and other clubs. Milan fans, as I said the other day, weren't particularly happy that he was going. Max Allegri certainly wasn't particularly happy that it was going, and he's going to slot into that defence really, really well. He's going to add pace, which he's not had for years. He's not had since the takeover, really. I mean, Botman, his best is no slouch, but he's not rapid. And the great thing about Thiaw is he's powerful, he's physical, and he can play with the ball at his feet as well. There's lots of reasons why Newcastle wanted Thiaw, and I do think that this is a real positive sign for the summer. If you add him to Anthony Elanga, then that's two of the big things. The main two things have been solved in the squad and upgraded from the back end of last season. And on paper, again, there is a massive asterisk over Alexander Isak at the moment because he said that he doesn't want to play for the club and he won't feature, certainly almost, it feels like, until September at the very earliest, if he's still at the club. Because I know that he said that he won't play ever again, but I have my doubts as to whether that's the case, because that seems like a very convenient time to say that, and also, it's a big threat to have when you've got Liverpool as a potential destination towards the end of the month. But once September rolls around and his choice is to sit at home and not play or to get involved, I'm pretty sure he'll get his head down and score goals this season. But more on Isak later. Thiaw steps in and improves that defence. Anthony Elanga steps in and improves the right-hand side, and Aaron Ramsdale comes in and improves the goalkeeper. As I said, when Ramsdale arrived, you'd like him to be a major upgrade on Nick Pope, but he certainly is a major upgrade on Martin Dubravka. And when you put into context that Thiaw comes in to replace Lloyd Kelly, I think that's a huge upgrade too. And then Anthony Elanga being an upgrade on Jacob Murphy, although Jacob Murphy had a fantastic season last year, I think that's a very fair thing to say as well. So Newcastle's squad overall is improved, and and they haven't lost a key player yet. I know Alexander Isak could go, and there's lots of things that can happen over the next few weeks, but as things stand, Newcastle's squad is stronger than it was at the back end of last season now, because of those two arrivals, and it could get even stronger with the arrival of Jacob Ramsey as well. I'm a huge fan of Ramsey. I've been a huge fan of him for a few years. I like the fact that he's very much like Joe Willock, because I've been a huge fan of Joe Willock, but he's also probably an upgrade on Willock in terms of he's very good with the ball at his feet, carrying it. He's very good at getting in late into the box. He scored 6 goals and had 7 assists in 22-23, which is really his breakout season. He's had a rough couple of years with injuries and poor form, and sort of, I think, being shifted out of the team a little bit by the likes of Yuri Tillemans, Boubacar Kamara and others at Villa. And maybe it's time for him to move on. His career kind of mirrors Joe Willock's in a sense, but I think he's an upgrade. I think Willock's had a difficult time with form, fitness, confidence over the last couple of years as well, but he never hit the heights that Jacob Ramsey did when he first emerged. Jacob Ramsey is definitely an Eddie Howe type player. I've got a couple of stats here, they're from FBref, but they're not courtesy of FBref in terms of you won't be able to see them on the screen. It's from an article written about him a couple of years ago. He was in the 91st percentile for progressive carries in the Premier League. Expected assists were in the 95th percentile, ahead of Gabriel Martinelli and Martin Ødegaard. Pass accuracy was 82%, and he made 2.36 tackles and 1.64 blocks per 90. So he's a all-round midfielder, even though he's very good at getting into the box and progressing the team. He's very much an Eddie Howe type signing, and 24, he's just turned 24 in May. He's a couple of years younger effectively than Joe Willock as well. Bilal El Khanous has been linked as well, whether he's an alternative or an addition on top of it. I did discuss this yesterday. I think ideally you'd like him to be both and then maybe see Joe Willock depart, but if it's Willock and Jacob Ramsey, then Ramsey has got to be seen as an upgrade on Sean Longstaff in terms of the options that he brings into that midfield. So I think, yeah, Jacob Ramsey is an excellent player, and then if you look at the squad overall as it stands now, with Thiaw added, Elanga added, and Aaron Ramsdale added as well, the squad is so much stronger in terms of quality in the same numbers. They haven't added anybody, which is maybe a little bit of a concern. Yes, Ramsey's injury record isn't great, and yes, his form over the last year or two, he's dipped off from the numbers that I've just read out, but his ceiling is certainly higher than Sean Longstaff, and I would argue higher than Joe Willock as well. So Newcastle would have options in those positions. Alexander Isak is still at the club too. Malik Thiaw is an upgrade on Lloyd Kelly, and Aaron Ramsdale's an upgrade on Martin Dubravka. I don't think the first team is much stronger, bar maybe the right hand side, and there's a question mark which we'll talk about later in the week, whether Malik Thiaw gets into the first team immediately at Villa and against Liverpool and other games at the start of the season, whether he has to bide his time. But the squad is much stronger, and I think that's important, because the first 11 last season was, is what really got Newcastle fifth. I mean, Isak's goals, Tonali in midfield, Bruno in midfield. Gordon didn't have the best season. He looks like he's ready as well. Alanga's going to add something different on the other side. There's lots of reasons to be positive when you compare that to Aston Villa, who are now selling a player to a direct rival, which is not something that their fans are particularly happy about. They've only signed one player. They've got their own PSR issues. Tottenham have got big plans. Eberechi Eze and Savinho have been linked over the last couple of days, but they really need players. Kulusevski's got a long-term injury. James Maddison's now got a long-term injury. Son Heung-min's left. Dominic Solanke's not fit either. So there are big question marks over Thomas Frank and Spurs at the moment as well. Manchester United have strengthened up front, yes, but their midfield has still got some gaps. The defence has still got question marks over that. And then, yes, the top four has maybe pushed away a bit. But when you think about the context of Newcastle being in the race for that fifth place, they're in a really good spot if they can get these players through the door. And the squad really looks good, because that's what they needed. They needed pace and directness on the right-hand side. They've got that in Anthony Elanga. They needed someone with pace and good ball control and power at the back. They've got that in Malik Thiaw. They needed a goalkeeper who's good with his feet to help build up attacks. They've got that in Aaron Ramsdale. They'll need a striker to come in as well. Johan Visser is likely, even though the Ouattara deal at Bournemouth and Brentford is holding it up. It's like a house chain. Everybody's waiting for somebody to get a replacement. It feels like that one will still happen. Whether it happens before Villa, though, looks unlikely. And yeah, it feels then positive. Then you throw the Alexander Isak situation in, and I've been discussing this with Liverpool fans over the last 24 hours. Newcastle will not let Alexander Isak leave until they have a replacement. And there's a point made by Craig Hope on his video yesterday that I think is really interesting. I did sort of say this a little bit, but I think he said it more explicitly and in a better way. That Newcastle have said and shown everything to Isak that they've tried to do this deal. £150 million was seen as a minimum for a discussion over his future this summer. Suddenly now it feels like a hard valuation. If Liverpool match that, then Newcastle will talk. And they probably don't even really need to get that far in reality. They've looked for replacements. They've failed to get replacements. They've done everything they can. And I think Alexander Isak understands that. So even though he's not training, and if he came back in, one, it wouldn't be ideal for Eddie Howe because he's not focused. It would be a slightly toxic presence. Two, it weakens his stance from his perspective. If he comes back in, then it gives the suggestion that Newcastle can stop looking. That was what Craig Hope said. And I understand, I don't agree with it, but I understand that that's what his approach is. When it comes to September, if he's still at St James's Park, there'll be a conversation to be had over a contract. There'll be a conversation to be had over a release clause. All the things that he's shunned while Liverpool are on the table. If they're not by the end of the transfer window, those conversations will likely happen. And yeah, you could argue that he'll take him time to get fit and it'll take him time to get his head straight. But we saw last season that he is lethal when he gets in front of goal, and it's in his interest. Yeah, I know Liverpool fans have been saying that of course he'll still get picked for Sweden if he doesn't play, if he goes on strike, but it doesn't do him any good to be on the sideline for at least 4 months, possibly even 10 months, and it certainly doesn't do Newcastle any good either. I think there would be a compromise in that scenario, but Newcastle can't sell before they get a replacement because it just weakens them. So there has to be a replacement in, and whether that player is Samu, whether that player is Ollie Watkins, it would be difficult to imagine Watkins and Ramsey coming over from Villa. Visser coming in is still likely. The options out there that Newcastle really want for a striker, I know Jean-Philippe Mateta was linked over the last couple of days, but I just can't see that either. This late in the window, it just feels like that's too much. This is what I've said for quite a long time. It feels like it's too much to be done for Isak to leave to go to Liverpool this summer, and I think he'll then reintegrate. So Newcastle's squad, as it looks, will be stronger by the end of the window than it was at the end of last season in terms of quality. Numbers is a bit of an issue. Maybe they needed a couple more. As I said, I would like to see them have another midfielder and maybe a creative midfielder, say Alkanous and Ramsey would be good upgrades, but in a PSR world they have to be careful. In terms of the quality of who's gone out and who's come in, the squad is in a much better place, it looks like, than it was, and that's really, really important when you go and put it into context against other clubs, but also in context against what's been said this summer in terms of rejections, in terms of the Isak saga. It's all been negative. The narrative has gone so far against what Newcastle wanted. It hasn't been the transformative summer, but it's not been a disaster, far from it. And actually, as I say, they've come out with a stronger squad. Maybe not as strong as they would like, maybe not as strong as they thought they could get, but those players are all better than what have gone out in those positions, and I think that's a really, really positive thing. I can't see Isak going, as I say. I think the situation is as it is until September, and his idea isn't to play for Newcastle anymore, so he will really want to push that. He's happy to burn his bridges. That's what's evident over the last couple of days, and that's quite sad, but he thinks that this will help him get to Liverpool. I don't think it'll help him get to Liverpool. I don't think that it's possible. I think even he will understand, and his camp will understand, that Newcastle have played ball. It's not that it's not that they've told him that he'll rot in the reserves and he can go nowhere. Even though their public stance has been he's not for sale, they've actually moved down from 150 million being a minimum price to being a hard valuation and finding replacements. If Sesko had come in last week, Isak's probably playing for Liverpool against Bournemouth on Friday. That's not the case because Sesko rejected Newcastle. There aren't any other options, or very many other options out there. Players like Samu, players like Watkins, players like Vlahovic. From the video that I did last week on the striker options, on what the market really reflects, everybody has some quite serious cons and some quite serious caveats on their heads, and I think that is not conducive really with replacing someone like Alexander Isak. I understand the suggestion from people that he should be just sold because he's a toxic presence, and off the back of last season when he came in, he may think, well, I did this last year, so is it as easy to reintegrate him at the start of this season as it was last year when he had difficulties last summer? I don't know. It doesn't mean that they should sell him for less than his value, and it certainly doesn't mean that they should sell him without a replacement, because with 2.5, 3 weeks left of the window, if you sell him, and it's not going to be happening at any point quickly as well, it would be a late sale, probably after the Liverpool game, and then you've got, in that case, days to go and replace him. It's impossible. So I just can't see a world where Isak goes this summer, and I think he will get his head down despite everything. Let me know in the comment section what you think on Thiaw joining, on Jacob Ramsey joining, on the general health of the squad, on the rating of the transfer window this summer. When you put it into context, I don't think it's nearly as bad. Not as good as it could have been. That's the difference. I think Newcastle had high hopes. We all had high hopes. They haven't really paid off, but it's been far from a disaster, especially if they manage to reintegrate Alexander Isak. That's my opinion. I know other people want him gone, but if you sell him when you're weak, then it doesn't help. It has to be on Newcastle's terms. And as I said yesterday, Newcastle set their terms out for a sale of Isak, and they haven't been met. And I don't think anybody can really criticise Newcastle for their approach here. I know Liverpool fans like to say that. I know the whole contract situation, and there's lots of rumours that he told Newcastle it was his last season. That just doesn't add up. If you look at what he was saying last season about his future, and also if you look at his actions, somebody said that he didn't want Newcastle to qualify for the Champions League, and in that case, why did he score the goal that ultimately qualified them with that penalty in the last minute against Brighton? There's lots of these things that are just history's being rewritten, and everybody's just got to cut through the noise. Thanks so much for joining me on today's episode. Like, share and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another one. Catch you then. Cheers.